In addition to the philosophical movement of enlightenment that we talked about last class, during the 18th century there's an increasing impulse for ordinary people, again primarily upper and upper middle class ordinary people, to show their worldliness and sophistication. One mark of this kind of sophistication was to take what was called a grand tour. This was an extended vacation, usually through Europe, traveling to several different countries, and it was most popular in England, where people were physically separated from the European continent, but it also featured in other cultures as well. And the idea of a grand tour is that you could visit the places that you've maybe only read about in history books, like Rome or Florence, and that you could see the sights and experience the cultures of Europe. This is particularly important because the first excavations at Pompeii start in the mid-18th century, in the 1760s. And at the time, as a tourist, you could visit Pompeii, bring your own shovel, or borrow one from a guide, and dig up your own souvenir. Souvenirs of other kinds were also popular, though, and artists like Canaletto painted many versions of pictures like these that were another kind of souvenir that wealthy young travelers could take home and hang up on their walls to reflect their travels. Here we see buildings that are famously recognizable, a part of Venice. On the far left, for instance, we see the edge of the Doge's palace. But the primary focus is on the everyday activities of the people in the foreground, implying a comfortable familiarity with the everyday life and culture in these often distant European cities. Another way that you could show your sophistication is through collecting objects or owning objects that reflected a more worldly aesthetic. With the growth of neoclassical styles, replicas of those styles also became very popular for the middle classes. This is an urn from the Wedgwood Company, a ceramics and pottery company that still exists today. And this is in their Jasperware style, a unique matte glaze style that they developed. And Wedgwood often imitated the kinds of Roman vases and Roman objects that were coming out of excavations at places like Pompeii, but with certain edits or changes for the audience of the 18th century. So, for instance, this 18th century audience was often much less comfortable with the kind of nudity that we might expect to see on a true Roman vase. And so instead, motifs were chosen like the ones on this vase that reference original Roman vase decorations, but would still be seen as acceptable to the audience at the time. Interestingly, Wedgwood was also an incredibly modern company in many ways, pioneering many things that we think of as common business practices. What the Wedgwood Company implied secretaries that were fluent in many languages, so customers could write and inquire in their native language and receive a response in the same language, even though the company itself was located in England. Similarly, Wedgwood pioneered the use of modern sales tactics, including coupons and buy one, get one free offers. The Wedgwood Company seems to be the origin of that particular sales tactic. But the goal of things like this was to make you at least appear to have a certain kind of status, that you could own this kind of item that referenced your worldliness and your sophistication. Wedgwood was relatively affordable, and like we said, they had these kinds of modern sales techniques that made this a more accessible kind of worldliness to a true middle class, rather than Canaletto's paintings and the grand tour we talked about the last slide. But there were also many knockoffs of Wedgwood items. As soon as Wedgwood came up with a new design or a new idea, it was copied by their competitors and, just like today, in counterfeit versions, so that even the true middle and lower middle classes could own objects that looked like this. And even if you weren't part of this kind of quote-unquote true, real-worldly sophistication, you could own objects that implied it.